Think about the history books you read in school. Now, imagine if the most world-shaking discoveries were never actually printed in them. What if some artifacts were so radical, so out of place, that they were hidden away the moment they left the ground? From secret chambers beneath the Sphinx to ancient tools that rewrite the human timeline by 200,000 years. Today, we're digging up the truth. These are 10 archaeological discoveries that were immediately covered up. Are you ready to see what's behind the curtain? Let's travel back to 1962 to the high-altitude Valsequillo Reservoir, just south of Puebla, Mexico. At the time, this was just another routine excavation. A respected archaeologist named Cynthia Irwin Williams was leading the dig. She wasn't looking for aliens or myths, she was looking for the ancestors of the Americas. And at a spot called Hueyatlaco, she struck gold, archaeological gold. She uncovered a series of sophisticated stone tools. We're talking about finely crafted scrapers, double-edged blades, and even advanced projectile points. These weren't just rocks, they were the high-tech hunting gear of their era. Now, in the 1960s, there was an absolute law in archaeology called the Clovis First Theory. It stated that the first humans arrived in the Americas about 13,000 years ago, crossing a land bridge from Siberia. This wasn't just a theory, it was the foundation of every career in the field. So, Irwin Williams naturally assumed these tools were maybe 11,000 or 12,000 years old. But then the geology team arrived to confirm the dates. Among them was a young, brilliant PhD student from the U.S. Geological Survey named Virginia Steen McIntyre. Her job was to date the layers of volcanic ash, or tephra, that covered the tools. Virginia didn't just use one method. She knew the implications were big, so she used 4. She used uranium series dating on butchered animal bones found with the tools. She used fission track dating on the volcanic crystals. She used tephra-hydration to see how much water the volcanic glass had absorbed over time. And finally, she studied the mineral weathering of the soil itself. She ran the numbers. Then she ran them again. She expected 13,000 years. She got 250,000 years. Pause for a moment. 250,000 years. This didn't just break the timeline, it shattered it. In 1966, modern humans, Homo sapiens, weren't even thought to have evolved in Africa that long ago, let alone migrated across the world and developed advanced stone tool tech in central Mexico. Virginia was honest. She was a scientist first. She reported the dates. And that is when the cover-up, or as the academics call it, the consensus, began to move against her. For years, the professional community tried to ignore the data. They told her there must be a mistake. They suggested the tools had slipped down into older layers of earth. But Virginia and her team proved that the layers were undisturbed. The tools were in situ. They were exactly where they were dropped 250,000 years ago. By 1981, after nearly 2 decades of trying to get the results published, Virginia finally got her paper into a major peer-reviewed journal. The reaction wasn't curiosity, it was fury. The academic establishment didn't just disagree, they attacked. She was called incompetent. She was accused of destroying the integrity of American archaeology. But the most chilling part of the cover-up wasn't the insults, it was the silence. The Mexican government, under pressure from elite archaeologists, seized the site. They pulled the permits. They literally filled the trenches back in with dirt. The artifacts were moved into storage and for a long time lost to public view. Virginia Steen McIntyre paid the ultimate price for her honesty. Her career was effectively ended. She couldn't get a teaching job. Her funding was cut off. She was treated as a pariah, a crazy person who dared to challenge the status quo. In her letters, she wrote about how she felt she was being erased by a system that preferred a comfortable lie over a difficult truth. To this day, if you bring up Hueyatlaco in a mainstream university, you'll likely get a roll of the eyes or a lecture on why the dating must be wrong, despite no one ever being able to prove the 4 dating methods were flawed. The site remains a silent, dusty field in Mexico, a physical reminder that sometimes when we find something that doesn't fit our story, we don't change the story. We just bury the evidence. For our second discovery, We travel to the Giza Plateau in Egypt. Standing guard before the Great Pyramids is the Sphinx, a monolith that has baffled historians for centuries. But while most tourists are looking up at its weathered face, a handful of scientists have spent decades looking down, beneath its paws. In the late 1980s and early 90s, a team of researchers from Florida State University and Waseda University in Japan conducted a series of seismic surveys. They weren't digging, they were using ground-penetrating radar and sonic waves to see through the limestone bedrock. What they found sent shockwaves through the Ministry of Antiquities. Directly under the Sphinx's left paw, at a depth of about 2 to 5 meters, the radar hit something hollow. It wasn't a natural fissure. It was a perfectly rectangular chamber. Now, why is this a cover-up? To understand that, we have to talk about the legendary Hall of Records. According to ancient lore and the famous 20th century clairvoyant Edgar Cayce, there exists a hidden library beneath the Sphinx containing the entire history of a lost civilization, perhaps Atlantis itself, and the secrets of the building of the pyramids. When the radar confirmed these voids, the world held its breath. In 1996, a project called the SCORE Expedition used even more advanced equipment. They didn't just find one room, they found a series of tunnels and a massive cavity that seemed to lead toward the Great Pyramid. It looked like a subterranean map was finally being drawn. But then, the iron curtain of Egyptian bureaucracy slammed shut. Dr. Zahi Hawass, the then head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, began to publicly dismiss the findings. Despite the clear seismic data showing right-angled man-made structures, the official narrative shifted. They claimed these were just natural anomalies or water-filled cracks in the limestone. Wait, it gets stranger. Every time an independent team requested a permit to drill a small, non-invasive hole to lower a fiber optic camera into the void, the permits were denied. Often they were told it was for site preservation. Yet, locals and whistleblowers have reported seeing heavy machinery working around the Sphinx late at night, under the cover of darkness, with high fences blocking the view of the public. If there is nothing there, why the extreme secrecy? If it's just a natural cave, why not let a camera prove it once and for all? The technical insight here is crucial. The Sphinx shows heavy signs of water erosion. Geologists like Robert Schoch have argued this means the Sphinx was carved thousands of years earlier than the pharaohs, back when Egypt had heavy rainfall. If the Sphinx is older, then whoever built those chambers beneath it belongs to a ghost civilization that isn't in our history books. The cover-up here isn't just about a hidden room, it's about protecting the brand of Egypt. If it's proven that the Sphinx wasn't built by the dynastic Egyptians, it would bankrupt the current historical narrative, so the chambers remain sealed. The radar data is gathered and then reinterpreted until it fits the official story. The Sphinx keeps its secrets, not because we haven't found them, but because we aren't allowed to open the door. For our third discovery, we move from the scorching sands of Egypt to the rolling green landscapes of Worcestershire, England. The year is 2011. Two metal detectorists are exploring the site of an ancient Iron Age hill fort on Bredon Hill. They expect to find a few buttons or maybe a discarded horseshoe. Instead, their detectors emit a signal so strong it feels like they've hit a buried car. Buried inside a large, fractured clay pot were nearly 3,000 Roman silver coins, denarii. But these weren't just any coins. They spanned the reigns of 16 different emperors. Imagine the scene, a massive fortune, buried in a panicked hurry inside an ancient earthen wall. Now, why is this considered a cover-up? It's a different kind of concealment, one involving bureaucracy and the rewriting of how the Roman Empire ended in Britain. For years, the official story was that the Romans left Britain in an orderly, planned withdrawal around 410 AD. But the Bredon Hill Hoard tells a much darker, bloodier story. When the coins were analyzed, archaeologists realized the hoard was buried during a period of total systemic collapse. These coins represented someone's entire life savings, hidden during a time of extreme violence. But here's where it gets suspicious. As the discovery was being processed, there was a strange delay in publicizing the full extent of the find. Under the UK's Treasure Act, the government has the right to claim such finds for museums. For months, the exact location and the specific dates of the coins were kept under wraps. Rumors began to circulate among the local community that more than just coins had been found, that there were signs of a massacre at the hill fort that didn't fit the peaceful Roman exit narrative. The technical insight here is fascinating. By studying the clumping of the coins, researchers could see that they had been in leather pouches that rotted away. This means the money was ready to be moved at a moment's notice. The person who buried them never came back. Why? Because the orderly Roman Britain was actually a war zone of looters and invading tribes. The cover-up in this case was an attempt to manage the narrative. Academic institutions often slow-walk information that contradicts established timelines. If the Bredon Hill site proved that Roman authority vanished overnight in a wave of fire and blood, it would force historians to throw out decades of research. Furthermore, the valuation process was shrouded in secrecy. The finders and the landowners were forced into non-disclosure agreements, while the Crown decided what the official value and story would be. For a long time, the public only saw a fraction of the hoard. It wasn't until independent researchers started asking questions about the archaeological layers around the pot that the truth began to leak out. The fort at Bredon Hill hadn't just been a storage site. It had been a final, desperate stand. The Bredon Hill hoard reminds us that sometimes history is covered up, not by burying the objects, but by controlling the story they tell. They want us to see a pile of pretty coins in a museum case, not the screams and the smoke of a civilization falling apart in the mud. Imagine an army of 50,000 elite soldiers, trained, armed, and marching across the desert. Now imagine them simply vanishing. No survivors, no graves, no trail. For 2,500 years, the story of the Persian king Cambyses and his lost army was considered a fairy tale, a cautionary myth told by the Greek historian Herodotus. The story goes that in 525 BC, Cambyses II sent this massive force from Thebes to attack the Oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis. They marched for 7 days, reached a spot called the Island of the Blessed, and then, nothing. Herodotus claimed a vast and terrible wind rose from the south, burying the entire army in a mountain of sand. For centuries, archaeologists searched, but the Sahara is a vast, shifting graveyard. Most experts eventually concluded the army never existed. They called Herodotus a liar. But in the late 1990s and early 2000s, things changed. 2 Italian archaeologists, the Castiglione brothers, began finding something remarkable near the Siwa Oasis. Using satellite imagery and ground surveys, they found ancient bronze daggers, silver armlets, and hundreds of human bones emerging from the dunes. These weren't local remains, they were Persian. Even more shocking, they found a natural rock shelter, a massive cave that would have been the perfect place for an army to seek refuge from a sandstorm. So, where is the cover-up? Whenever a discovery of this magnitude is made, you expect a massive international excavation. But instead, the Egyptian authorities became strangely silent. After the initial reports of the Castiglione brothers leaked out, the area was restricted. Official Egyptian archaeologists downplayed the find, claiming the bones were undatable or likely just from lost caravans. But why? The insight lies in nationalist archaeology. If an Italian team proves that a Persian army, a foreign invader, left a massive mark on Egyptian soil, it complicates the national narrative. Furthermore, the location of the find is near the border with Libya, an area of high military sensitivity. There's also a darker theory. Some researchers believe that the lost army wasn't swallowed by sand, but was actually defeated in a massive, embarrassing ambush by the Egyptian rebels. If Cambyses II wanted to maintain his image as a divine conqueror, he couldn't admit his army was slaughtered by inferior rebels. He needed a natural disaster to blame. This cover-up didn't start in the 20th century. It started in 525 BC. To this day, the site remains largely unexcavated. The bones are being reburied by the shifting sands, and the bronze weapons are likely being picked up by black market looters because official science isn't allowed to go there. We have found the graveyard of 50,000 men, yet the world is told there's nothing to see. The desert hid them once, and now human bureaucracy is hiding them again. For decades, history books told us a very specific story about the Roman Empire and Germany. After the disastrous Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9th AD, where 3 Roman legions were wiped out, the Romans supposedly gave up. The Rhine River became a permanent Iron Curtain. The Romans stayed on their side, and the Germanic tribes stayed on theirs. End of story. But in 2008, 2 amateur metal detectorists looking for an old medieval fortress stumbled upon something that shouldn't exist. On a hill called Harzhorn in Lower Saxony, their machines started screaming. They pulled up a Roman dolabra, a specialized pickaxe used by legionaries. Then they found sandal nails, then thousands of arrowheads and catapult bolts. Now why is this a cover-up? It's a cover-up of scale and narrative. When this site was first discovered, the academic establishment in Germany was incredibly slow to react. For months, it was treated as a minor skirmish, perhaps a few lost soldiers. But as the sheer volume of artifacts grew, over 3,000 items, it became clear that this was a massive, high-tech Roman military operation. The technical insight here is in the ballistics. Using 3D mapping, archaeologists could see the trajectory of the Roman catapult bolts. They weren't just defending themselves, they were executing a sophisticated pincer movement ambush against the Germanic tribes. The dating was the real kicker. The coins found at the site date back to the reign of Emperor Alexander Severus, around 235 AD. That is 200 years after the Romans were supposed to have abandoned this region. The cover-up happened because Harzhorn proves that the Roman Empire was still launching deep-strike military invasions nearly 300 miles past the official border. This discovery essentially made hundreds of PhD theses and textbooks obsolete overnight. In the early stages, there was significant pushback from senior historians who tried to claim these were looted items moved by Germans rather than a Roman army. They didn't want to admit they were wrong about the Roman-Germanic frontier for an entire century. Furthermore, the site was kept quiet while the government secured the land, fearing that the truth would bring out thousands of treasure hunters before the history could be sanitized for public consumption. Even today, many people still believe the Romans never went past the Rhine after 9 AD because the Harzhorn discovery hasn't been integrated into the general curriculum. This isn't just about old iron in the ground. It's about how we cling to a clean version of history even when the evidence says otherwise. The Romans were there, powerful, organized, and lethal, centuries after they were supposed to be gone. But sometimes it's easier to cover up a battlefield than it is to rewrite 1,000 textbooks. For our 6th discovery, we leave the ancient sands of Egypt and travel to the frozen fields of Minnesota, USA. The year is 1898. A Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman is clearing land when he uproots a massive poplar tree. Tangled in its roots is a flat, 200-pound slab of gray wax stone, covered in strange, angular carvings. This is the Kensington Runestone, and if it is real, it doesn't just nudge the history of America, it upends it. The inscription, written in Old Norse runes, tells a chilling story. It speaks of an expedition of 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on a journey of discovery in the year 1362. It describes a bloody encounter where 10 of their men were found red with blood and dead. The stone ends with a desperate prayer, "Save us from evil." Now, why is this a cover-up? Immediately after Oman found the stone, the academic world at the University of Minnesota and beyond declared it a hoax. They claimed Oman, a simple farmer, had carved it himself to play a prank. They called him a fraud, and for decades, the stone was used as a doorstep at a local granary, face down in the dirt. But as the years passed, the cover-up of silence began to crack. The technical insight here is in the linguistics and geology. Modern runologists have found that the specific dotted runes used on the stone were unknown in the 1890s, but were later discovered in 14th-century Swedish manuscripts. How could a 19th-century farmer know a dialect of runes that hadn't even been rediscovered by scientists yet? Furthermore, geological testing of the stone's weathering, the leaching of minerals from the carved grooves, suggests the carvings are centuries old, not decades. Yet, mainstream historians refuse to reopen the case. To admit the Kensington runestone is authentic is to admit that Europeans were deep in the American heartland, 3,000 miles from the ocean, more than 130 years before Christopher Columbus ever sailed. The cover-up here isn't a conspiracy of men in suits, it's a conspiracy of reputation. If the stone is real, then the Age of Discovery needs a total rewrite. It would mean the Vikings didn't just stay on the coast of Newfoundland. They navigated the Great Lakes and the river systems into the very center of the continent. Every time a new piece of evidence supports the stone, it is met with intense skepticism or buried in specialized journals that the public never sees. The stone now sits in a small museum in Alexandria, Minnesota, a silent witness to a history that was covered up because it was simply too big for the experts to handle. They wanted a simple story of 1492, but the Kensington runestone offers a complex, violent, and much older truth. Deep in the jungles of Chiapas, Mexico, lies the Temple of Inscriptions. In 1952, after 4 years of clearing rubble, archaeologist Alberto Ruzlille lifted a massive stone slab and found the tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal, the great sun lord of Palenque. But it wasn't just the gold or the sarcophagus that stunned the world. It was the face of the king himself, covered by a breathtaking mask made of 200 precisely fitted pieces of jade. Now, why is this a cover-up? Because the mask and the man behind it challenged every preconception we had about the Maya. First, let's talk about Pakal himself. According to the hieroglyphs, he lived to be 80 years old and ruled for 68 of them. In the 7th century, that was unheard of. When his remains were first analyzed, mainstream archaeologists, who wanted to stick to the short-lived primitive narrative, insisted the bones belonged to a man in his 40s. They effectively tried to erase the written history of the Maya to fit their own biological models. It took decades of DNA and strontium isotope testing to prove the Maya records were right and the modern experts were wrong. Then there is the mask. The technical insight here is staggering. Jade is one of the hardest stones on Earth. To cut, shape, and polish 200 individual pieces so they fit together like a seamless puzzle requires tools that, according to textbooks, the Maya didn't possess. They didn't have steel. They were supposed to be a Stone Age culture. Yet, the precision of the ear spools and the mosaic's thinness suggests a high-frequency vibration or advanced abrasive technique that remains unexplained. The cover-up also involves the famous sarcophagus lid, which sits just above the mask. To the public, it's just religious art. But to many researchers, the carvings show Pakal at the controls of a complex machine, with flames coming out of the bottom and his hands on what look like levers. Whenever a researcher suggests that the mask and the tomb represent a technological level far beyond our understanding, the academic community immediately labels it pseudo-archaeology. They cover up the implications of the find. They'd rather call it a symbolic tree of life than investigate the possibility that the Maya were masters of a lost science. Even today, certain details about the chemical composition of the Maya blue pigment and the adhesives used to bond the jade pieces are kept in highly restricted academic papers. Why? Because the more we look at the mask of Pakal, the more we realize that our Stone Age ancestors were anything but primitive. The mask was designed to grant Pakal eternal life, but for the rest of us, it's a mirror showing how much of our own history we've chosen to ignore. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying the city of Pompeii in ash, but its neighbor, Herculaneum, suffered a different fate. It was hit by a pyroclastic surge, a wave of heat so intense it carbonized everything instantly. Among the ruins was a magnificent villa, believed to belong to the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. Inside, archaeologists found a room filled with what looked like charred logs or pieces of charcoal. For years, excavators threw these logs away, using them as fuel for fires or simply tossing them into the trash. It wasn't until someone noticed faint Greek letters on one of them that the horrifying truth set in. They had been burning the only surviving library from the ancient world. This was the Villa of the Papyri. Now, why is this a cover-up? It's a cover-up born of fear and technical gatekeeping. For 2 centuries, hundreds of these scrolls sat in the National Museum of Naples. They were covered up because they were impossible to open. Anyone who tried to physically unroll them ended up with a pile of black dust. But the real secrecy lies in what these scrolls contain. Unlike the Bible or the famous Greek tragedies we all know, these scrolls are filled with Epicurean philosophy, teachings about the pursuit of happiness, the atomic nature of the universe, and a worldview that was considered dangerous and heretical for centuries. The technical insight here is a miracle of modern physics. For decades, the public was told these scrolls were unreadable, but behind the scenes, a team used a particle accelerator, a synchrotron, to fire high-energy X-rays at the carbonized lumps. Because the ancient ink was slightly denser than the charred paper, they could see the letters inside the layers without opening them. Recently, an AI challenge was launched to decode the data. What we are finding is a lost history of Roman thought that contradicts the official Stoic and Christian-leaning history usually taught about this era. The cover-up here is the decades of academic hesitation. Many scholars were reluctant to use these high-tech methods because the results might challenge the established translations of ancient texts. Even now, only a tiny fraction of the scrolls has been digitally unrolled. There are thousands more still buried in the lower levels of the villa, which the Italian government has refused to excavate for over 30 years. They claim it's for conservation, but many believe the site holds texts that could fundamentally change our understanding of the origins of Western philosophy and even early Christianity. We are staring at a library of ghosts, and the door is being kept locked by a mix of lack of funding and a fear of what those ghosts might say. Deep in the Cocle province of Panama, there is a place called El Caño. For decades, it was just a field of giant, mysterious monoliths. But in 2011, archaeologists digging beneath the surface found something that looked like a scene from a dark fantasy novel. They uncovered a massive, multi-layered tomb belonging to a chief of gold. The tomb was packed. We're talking about pectorals made of solid gold, belts of gold beads, bracelets, and earrings shaped like strange, monstrous creatures. But as they dug deeper, the beauty turned into a nightmare. Surrounding the chief were the remains of dozens of people, men, women, and even children. These weren't burials of family members. They were sacrificial victims, killed simultaneously to serve their master in the afterlife. Now, why is this a cover-up? It's a cover-up of cultural complexity. For a long time, mainstream history portrayed the indigenous tribes of the Isthmus of Panama as simple bridge cultures. Just people passing through between the Great Maya to the north and the Inca to the south. When El Caño was discovered, the sheer scale of the wealth and the organized ritualistic violence proved that this was a highly sophisticated, powerful, and independent empire. But for years, the full extent of the discovery was delayed in the media. Why? Because of the gold fever. The technical insight here is in the forensic taphonomy. By looking at the position of the bodies, researchers realized they were buried while still fresh, often placed on top of one another in a specific layering system. Some were buried with stingray spines used as ceremonial daggers. This level of ritual organization suggests a social hierarchy as rigid as that of ancient Egypt. But the cover-up goes beyond academics. Once the first gold pectorals were pulled from the mud, the site became a target. The Panamanian government and the lead researchers had to keep the most sensational finds secret for years to prevent a literal gold rush of looters and black market cartels. In fact, many pieces from the initial excavations were moved to secret locations and haven't been seen by the public since. There is also a political shushing involved. Admitting that a violent, gold-rich, and complex empire existed in Panama challenges the colonial narrative that these areas were empty or primitive before Europeans arrived. The Golden Chiefs of El Caño represent a lost chapter of American history, one that was buried under the mud, and now is being kept under lock and key to protect it from the very greed that created it in the first place. For our final discovery, we head to one of the most desolate places on Earth, the Judean Desert in Israel. In 2023, a team of researchers entered a small, nearly inaccessible cave overlooking the Dead Sea. They were there to photograph a known ancient inscription on a stalactite. But while they were deep inside the crevice, something caught the glint of their flashlights. Tucked away in a deep, narrow fissure were 4 Roman swords, still encased in their wooden and leather scabbards. They were so perfectly preserved that they looked like they had been placed there yesterday, not 1,900 years ago. 3 of them were spatha, long swords used by Roman cavalry, and the 4th was a shorter ring-pommel sword. Now, why is this a cover-up? This is a case of strategic silence. You see, these weren't Roman soldiers' swords that were lost. Roman soldiers didn't hide their weapons in caves. These were trophies. They were likely captured from the Roman army by Jewish rebels during the Bar Kokhba revolt. For the rebels, these swords were illegal, high-tier military hardware. If a Roman patrol had found them, it would have meant an immediate and brutal execution for anyone nearby. The cover-up here involves the extreme secrecy surrounding the site. The Israel Antiquities Authority, IAA, kept the discovery under total blackout for months. Why? Because the Judean desert is a hotbed for looter wars. There is a shadowy underground market where a single Roman sword can fetch millions of dollars. The authorities had to cover up the location and the progress of the excavation to win a race against professional looters who use night vision and drones to find these sites. The technical insight is in the preservation. Usually iron swords from this period are just lumps of rust. But the hyper-arid, stable climate of the Judean caves prevented oxidation. This allowed scientists to study the wood and leather, organic materials that almost never survive. They found that the wood wasn't local. It was imported from Northern Europe, showing the vast supply chain of the Roman war machine. But there's a deeper narrative layer. Some historians suggest that these swords represent a much larger cache of weapons that has yet to be revealed. There is a tension between the state-led archaeology and the local Bedouin communities who have known about these hidden holes for generations. The cover-up is part of a larger struggle over who owns the history of this land. By keeping these discoveries quiet and moving them into high-security labs, the authorities are not just protecting iron and wood, they are controlling a narrative of rebellion and resistance that is still very much alive in the region today. These swords were hidden once to escape Roman wrath, and they are being hidden again to escape the modern world's greed. From the jungles of Mexico to the deserts of Israel, we've seen a pattern. History is not just what happened, it's what survived the filters of politics, ego, and greed. These 10 discoveries were covered up, some by dirt, some by fire, and many by the people we trust to tell us the truth. But as we've seen today, the truth has a way of breathing. It waits in the dark, in the silence of a cave, or the layers of volcanic ash until someone is brave enough to look. The question is, what else is still waiting to be found? And more importantly, are we ready to hear the answer? I'm Enigma Explained, and thanks for digging into the truth with me. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to keep uncovering the world's most forbidden secrets.